Okay, here's the third lesson for Chapter 8. This is the second lesson on cosine law. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use the cosine law to find an unknown angle when we know all three sides. Okay. Previously in Chapter 8 is trigonometry of acute triangles. Okay. Previously in Chapter 8, we learned about the sine law, and we learned about when we can use that to help us solve for an unknown angle or side in an acute triangle. And in our last lesson, we learned about the cosine law and how you can use the cosine law to solve for an unknown side if you know the other two sides. If you know the other two sides, I know these two and their contained angle, I can find the third side. Okay, we learned that lesson yesterday, that was the last lesson. And the lesson today, we're going to find another use for the cosine law. Okay, the other use for the cosine law is if you know all three sides and you want to find an angle. Okay, you can use the cosine law in that scenario as well. Okay, so that's what today's lesson is going to focus on. Let's just remember what the cosine law is. We learned last lesson that the cosine law tells us that a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times cos a. Okay, and similarly for the other two sides, okay, for b and c, there's similar equations here. So the cosine law is in three equations, depending on which side or which angle you are looking for. That depends on which equation you're going to use. Okay, so like I said last lesson, we used this to find an unknown side when we knew two sides and a contained angle. So when we knew these two and their contained angle, we could find the third side. Today, focusing on scenario 2, where we know all three sides, and we're looking for this contained. We're looking for any of the angles, actually. Okay. So if we know three sides, we can find any of the angles using the cosine law. Okay. You could just plug in, since you know all three sides, choose the equation. So if we wanted to find angle B, you would choose this equation here, the middle one that has angle B in it. Plug in all the side lengths that you know. We know all of them. And then your only variable left would be angle B. You could solve for it. What I'm going to do is do a general rearrangement of this equation. That way we don't have to keep rearranging it whenever we're trying to find an angle. I'll isolate the angle right off the bat for us here. Okay. So how do we find angle A? Okay, if I know all three sides, well, the cosine law, I'm going to choose, first of all, I'm going to choose this equation here because that has angle A in it. Okay, so I'm just going to do a general rearrangement of this equation to solve for angle A. So I know A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cos A. I want to get cos A by itself. Okay, so I'm going to move b squared and c squared to the other side. So I'm going to subtract them to the other side. Because they are positive on the right, they will be negative on the left side of the equation. Okay, negative 2. I'm just going to rewrite that a little clearer. B squared equals negative 2 bc cos A. To get cos A by itself, because it's being multiplied by negative 2 times b times c, I have to divide the negative 2 times b times c to the other side. A squared minus b squared minus c squared is going to be over negative 2 bc. And that will be equal to cosine of A. If I rearrange the other two equations, so if I rearranged the second equation and isolated cosine of b, and if I rearrange this one and isolate a cosine of c, this is what I would get here in this red box here, which I'm now circling in green. Okay, I would get these three equations. Okay, what you want to do is look at the pattern so that you could generalize this to triangles that don't have their sides angles labeled with A, B, and C. Okay, so if I'm looking for angle A, the equation is the cosine of angle A equals A squared. So the side opposite angle A is A. So I start with A squared, and then I subtract the square of the other two sides. So subtract B squared and subtract C squared. And then I divide by negative 2 times those other two sides, B and C. For angle B, I start with side B squared, and then subtract the squares of the other two sides, A and C. And then divide by negative 2 times those other two sides, A and C. For angle C, I subtract the squares of the other two sides, from side C. And I divide by 2 times those other two sides. Okay, so that's the that's rearranged to find the angles. Okay, so if I want to find angle A, I would plug in my sides A, B, and C where I see A, B, and C, and do the inverse cos of that solution to find angle A. Okay, if my triangle was, let's say, triangle DEF, and I was looking for, let's say, angle E. Okay, I could generalize what I see here. I know the cosine of angle E would be equal to side E squared, and then, like these ones, I'm going to subtract the squares of the other two sides. So I'm going to subtract F squared and D squared, and then divide that by -2 times those other two sides, F and D. Okay, so that's that equation generalized to a different triangle that wasn't labeled with A, B, and C. Okay, so hopefully you can see how I did that. Let's do a couple of examples now. Okay, so if I wanted to solve for angle A of this triangle, I'm given the other three sides, so I know I can use the cosine law. That's one of the scenarios I use the cosine law is when I'm given three sides and I'm asked for an angle. I'm going to use one of these rearranged cosine law formulas that are used for solving for angles. Okay, I'm going to use the one that has angle A because that's the angle I'm looking for. So I'm going to use cosine of angle A. So first of all, let's write down what I'm given. I'm given side A, which is 8. Side A is across from angle A. I'm given side B, which is across from angle B, which is 9. And I'm given side C, which is across from angle C, which is 10. Okay, plug everything I know into this equation. So I want to solve for angle A, so I don't know angle A yet. So cos of A is equal to A squared minus the squares of the other two sides, minus 9 squared minus 10 squared, all over -2 times the product of those other two sides, 9 and 10. Okay, all we're going to do now is put this in on our calculator. Okay, make sure you put it in the way I'm about to show you, because I don't want you guys making mistakes on putting it in on your calculator. Especially if you understand what you're doing here, try not to make a mistake on your calculator, okay? So what you're going to do, you're first going to evaluate the numerator. You're going to do 8 squared minus 9 squared minus 10 squared. You're going to evaluate that numerator, hit enter. That's -117. Okay? Now, we want to divide this. Okay? If you want, okay, you could just, if you're not confident using your calculator, I would write the expression that I evaluated my numerator right there. And then I would go ahead and evaluate my denominator. -2 times 9 times 10, that is -180. Negative 180. I would then remember, if I have the cosine of an angle equals a ratio, and I know the ratio, to figure out the angle, I have to do the inverse cos of that ratio. Okay? -117 over -180. I have to do inverse cos because that's the notation that will tell my calculator that what I'm inputting is a ratio, not an angle. Okay, so if I do inverse cos, my calculator knows I'm putting in a ratio, and it'll tell me the angle that goes with that. Okay, so if I put that in on my calculator, do inverse cos, so second cos of -117 divided by -180. Okay, my calculator will evaluate that and tell me it's 49.5 when I round that to the nearest 10. So angle A equals 49.5. Okay. How I do this, how you might do this on your calculator if you're confident with this, okay, is you will, so after you've plugged everything into your equation here, what you can do, you can just do 8 squared minus 9 squared minus 10 squared. Okay, hit equals, and then we want to divide that by the product in our denominator here. So we have to tell our calculator to do that multiplication first so that it divides the whole product, so we have to put it in brackets. So we're going to divide our answer by -2 times 9 times 10, and make sure that that product is in brackets, so our calculator does that multiplication first, and then divides that whole product by the answer. We get 0.65. So that tells us that this whole ratio here is 0.65, and then to figure out the angle, we would do the second cosine of 0.65. Okay, -117 over -180 is 0.65. So do second cosine of that answer, and that is, once again, 49.5. So you can see, if you're good working with your calculator, you can skip a lot of these steps, get right to your angle. At first though, just do the numerator, evaluate it, do the denominator, evaluate it, and then do the inverse cos of that ratio, so your calculator will tell you the angle. Okay? Once you get good at using your calculator, you might be able to skip to this. Okay? Let's just do a couple more quick examples, just to make sure we have this down here. Okay? So